raise a family. They have some of the same opportunities that me and my wife.
You agreed that we need to see them as a terrorist organization.
On a private cloud server, yes or no?
To love country, to love God, and to try to do the right thing.
Worked for the nation and the interests of the people.
But nothing gets by you guys.
3, 2, 1.
Ready? Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast, the podcast with freedom-loving freshman members of Congress. I'm Eric Burles from Missouri, and I'm joined by Representatives Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma, Eli Crane from Arizona, and Andy Ogles from Tennessee. And the man that this swamp loves to hate, the Florida man himself, Mr. Matt Gaetz. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. I can't believe freshman members of Congress got together to do this. I love it.
So we're going to get all of your input. We love to have you on. First, I wanted to kind of ask you, I was able to find, I actually had to get them to check to actually acquire this book from the Library of Congress, a book that you may have heard of called The Laptop from Hell.
Yes, Miranda Devine, a brilliant piece. And, you know, the laptop thing really showcased for me the life cycle of how the truth is understood in Washington, D.C. First, it's a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. Then it's Russian disinformation. Then it's true, but it's actually a good thing that it happened. And then they try to prosecute some sort of conservative or Republican for it. Like, that is kind of the broad cycle that we see. And the laptop was no exception. I mean, this was really the CIA engaged in direct election interference. And if you would have said that, you would have been banished to the darkest recesses of the internet, like not long ago. But in our work on the weaponization subcommittee, we got admissions that people working at the CIA told their former employees that if they wanted their books and manuscripts approved for publication, they had to sign the Hunter Biden letter, saying that the laptop was Russian disinformation. And then big tech and big media used that, along with big government, to try to reshape the nature of truth. And so it's a heck of a story, and it's one that I think we've got to grapple with still as a country.
Well, I'm on Oversight Committee, which is kind of a sister committee to Judiciary.
We view it as like judiciary without the legislating.
We view it as a broader committee. We have more scope.
Yes. Well, you're doing a great job. I mean, you look at what has already been uncovered by the Oversight Committee. And if you'd have started this Congress saying at the end of it, we're going to be able to have bank records that link Chinese money direct to members of the Biden family, you would have said that that was exquisite oversight. But there's so much corruption in politics now, and frankly, so much of it on both sides. I really worry that the country's getting desensitized.
I think that they are, yeah. I mean, when I go back home, I tell people that this, not only did they get the money from a foreign entity, but it literally went into a bank account that was Venmo'd to prostitutes. You can't make that up.
It is a rough story for the Bidens to grapple with, but what we're now uncovering is not just bad activity from the Biden family, but then overlaying that, a very organized effort by our own government to cover it up.
Yeah.
That any time derogatory information came in about the Bidens, it was labeled Russian disinformation and sequestered away from the normal process of review. And that is now laid bare.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, obviously, we want to get to a little bit of advice from you about what, if for us freshman members, right? But one of the things I think that you've shown us recently is the impact that you can have in a committee hearing just asking questions. Yeah. Because if you haven't seen it, guys, when he's inquiring of General Milley about the money that's being used on drag shows and all this waste.
DEI.
Right, all the DEI stuff. Guess what happens, right? Out of embarrassment, suddenly now they're deciding they're not going to fund that stuff right now.
Yeah, I saw that. There was an impact you had by asking him questions, and now he's following suit with some question, his response to you.
Yeah.
And he's making a policy decision thanks to the questions you asked.
Well, I think that we have to view this job as more than just people who put a little card into a machine and hit a red or a green button. I actually think over time, AI could probably do that on behalf of our constituents. So I reject the notion that we are lawmakers alone. I believe that representative is a more appropriate title, and it's one that puts a broader burden on us to take direct action. We are on the board of directors of the most powerful country in the world. We have been given this opportunity to make an impact. And frankly, it is disappointing to me how many non-playing characters we have who just surrender that opportunity to the lobbyists and the PACs and the special interests. And it requires, I think, a commitment to the Constitution, but also, I think, to one another and to your district to be more sincere in representation. And that's what we hope you guys represent, and it's certainly what your work has demonstrated thus far.
Tell us a story, Matt, that something that would be your top 2 or 3, maybe your top 1 experience that you've had as a member of Congress.
Yeah, I think the most corrupt week here is freshman orientation, because you show up to this place, and for me, I'm a country lawyer from the panhandle of Florida, and I show up here and they give you like the best French wine you have ever had, the best steak dinner you've ever had, and then they literally sit you at the tables with the lobbyists who lobby the committees that they think you might want to serve on. And you're there to basically get screened by this group of lobbyists to see if you're going to be malleable to their interests when they conflict with the interests of your constituents. And at the conclusion of that orientation process, I figured, look, I really want to be on the Armed Services Committee where you see the work we've done. And I thought, okay, well, I'll need to talk about how many installations are in my district. I'll need to talk about its impact financially on my community. But when I made a request to be on that committee, I was told by a very powerful person in leadership, that'll be $75,000. And if you deliver $75,000 in the next 10 days to the NRCC, the Republican congressional entity, that you'll be put on that committee. Wow. And so, I'm from a district with a lot of affluent, patriotic people. I paid the money. I paid the ransom money. I double paid. I was worried too many people would pay the $75,000, so I paid $150,000. And that's how I got on the House Judiciary Committee, because they said, well, you're a real comer.
Yeah, for me, it was remarkable. I was an investment advisor, and I thought, well, it makes sense to be on financial services. But because there's other members from my state on that committee already, I'm completely blocked from being on that committee.
But all those little weird rules
Right.
are an affront to a meritocracy.
Right.
That sort of weird parochialism
It is.
ought to be thrown out when the boomers kind of age out of this place, which, by the way, I think we've got more people over the age of 70 serving in the Congress than at any other time in America's history. And one of the young ones is Fetterman. So, can't really count him.
Right.
Oh my God. Yeah, I actually asked, one of the committees I put in for was Foreign Affairs, and they said they wouldn't let me be on the committee because I didn't support sending money to Ukraine. I mean, it's
they were just point blank with you about that.
Right.
Well, yeah, it wasn't, that's what it was said, by many people. Over and over and over again, that was the theme.
But then pull that thread. What does that mean in terms of the only type of people who are allowed to participate in those debates and craft the foreign aid bills?
Yep.
Eric Swalwell also tried to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but it wasn't as literal as he thought, so he made different requests thereafter.
And the other thing, I have to give it to you, after we can go into the discussion of the first week of session, how that was really set the tone for the rest of the year. But what's amazing is that, this is to your skill, is that you decided, I'm going to bring forward these privilege motions to withdraw us from some of these theaters of combat, and leadership can't stop those actions.
Well, and I think it's to everyone's credit, from Kevin McCarthy to every last one of us, that we now have ended the reign of the imperial speaker. The speaker that could just say, I'm not going to allow the traditional privileges of the individual members to even be exercised. I decide yes or no, and you live with it. And then they created a fear regime and a retaliation regime around that became very effective. And what I really hope, above maybe all else, is that the reforms we've pushed are enduring. And after we did what we could to get the House into a more open and transparent posture to allow votes on things like our foreign conflicts, it's a toolkit. And we have to use that toolkit effectively, and we can't just admire how shiny the tools are, while patting ourselves on the back. And we have to deal with that each and every day. But I can say, yes, it's a good credit to everyone that we now have to take a vote on. Do people really think that the U.S. has an enduring mission in Somalia or Syria? Like what side of the Syrian civil war have we not been on yet? And honestly, I appreciate a lot of the advice Eli gives me about how people who have recently served in the military, who are serving in the military, think about their own contribution to the fight when decision makers aren't faithful to realism.
Yeah. Well, it's actually pretty horrible advice. I mean, that's what the rest of this group tells me. Isn't that right, Josh?
Expound.
He's joking with you.
You scared me.
And I mean, to Matt's point, though, there are very few people, that have your experience, and to have a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, to be able to talk about what is it the men and women see that have put their lives on the line. I think you ought to expound upon that.
Yeah, we've actually got quite a few, men and women up here with some pretty good service. I mean, you guys know who they are, but it is interesting. We talk about how transactional this place is, that if you don't have the right viewpoint or the right agenda, there's definitely a ceiling, which is unfortunate. But I guess that's what most of us expected.
Well, you kind of surprised me because a lot of times I've seen, and I hate to say this stereotypically, but a lot of people that have served, they tend to come into this body, and their attitude is, it's almost like the military. Like you answer to leadership,
orders, right?
you follow orders, you do exactly, and you cheerlead under the chain of command. But I think that you recognize that you serve your constituents.
No, it's 100%. I tell people all the time, I think the most lacking ingredient up here is moral courage. And a lot of our veterans, they definitely have plenty of courage. But I think that's the one thing that often gets them off track, is that they fall in line. They think that whatever party they belong to, that leadership is their new chain of command. And it's just like, that is not your chain of command.
Your district is your chain of command.
Yeah, your district and your constituents are your chain of command. And if you continue just to vote yes with leadership all the time, you're not going to change anything. You're just going to promote the status quo up here.
So what fertilizes moral courage?
I think there's a lot that goes into that. You could get into the nurture nature debate, but for me, I think it was a lot of it was my upbringing. What about you?
We can't fix that about these people.
Matt, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think fertilizes? What do you think fertilizes?
You've said before that at times it can be mildly contagious.
That's true. That is true. And I think that last week, I'm hoping, and I know that we had a pretty big defeat last week on the debt ceiling vote, but there were 10 additional people that voted against the rule. And I think that's considered what? Legislative terrorism up here, Matt? Is that what they say?
I see the standards and the goalposts move so much that I don't ascribe to any of those mores. And whenever any of these staffers or leadership aides come up to me and say, well, here's how we've always done it, I just think to myself, I sometimes say to them, pretend in the rest of this conversation as if I have no reverence for how we've used to, that I have only prejudice for the things that are the way that we usually do them here, because it's deliberate. A lot of times, regular Americans, they look at this and say, why can't you guys figure it out? I mean, a small business person could tell you how to run this operation more efficiently and effectively, and the problems in Washington are a feature of the system, not a bug, because it's all about centralizing power among those who are most persuadable to a particular viewpoint or corruptible with a particular device. I mean, I look at the number of family members of people in Congress employed by big tech, and it either is the subject of amazing scientific study that the offspring and relatives of members of Congress have exquisite skill stacks necessary to big tech, or it's just another vector of the corruption.
Well, what would be y'all's answer? It's a good question about what's the fertilizer for moral courage.
I think once you've been in a situation where you're really pushed to the limit, and then you're able to buck the system and vote no, and then you're able to get through the other side of it and realize the world didn't come to an end. You didn't die, right? Like that people at the end of it are still affirming of you, that there's some people that still have your back.
That's a very
affirming.
like build the calluses theory of moral courage.
That's how I think it works for me. I think that you do have to. It's like playing the guitar. I don't play the guitar, but they'll tell you like you have to build up those calluses so that eventually it becomes you're not even worried about, and you don't.
Does anyone here play the guitar?
No.
Is there any skill that you have that you haven't made money on that you wouldn't trade to be able to play the guitar? Because I've gone through this analysis, and other than the skills that I've needed to provide for my family, I would trade literally the rest of them to be able to play the guitar.
Well, so we did just take a big vote on this. The debt
How many $4 trillion mistakes do you think we can make?
Well, so that's the point. It's like, where do we go from here? Because it's important to note that it's date certain, not dollar certain. So I'm not convinced it's $4 trillion. I think it's going to be more like $5 trillion.
Wait, but this administration would never take a unilateral action that would add to mandatory spending in the trillions of dollars. Oh wait, they just did with the student loan thing.
Right.
So when you underwrite unlimited debt with an entity that believes that they have an unlimited and unchecked power to get the people to pick up the bill, do we just get played on this thing?
Well, this was a game of chicken, and our side blinked. But we're at $32 trillion in debt. Some people will say that 37 is essentially the break point when it comes to debt to GDP, and so. Simple math, 32 plus 4 is 36. Let's assume I'm wrong, there's not $5 trillion. Like, we're literally bumping up against this ceiling that puts us on a path to destruction, and nobody's panicked.
You know why? Because they don't feel it yet. People don't feel the impact of the debt directly. They feel it oftentimes through inflation, but there can be a whole kaleidoscope of causalities on that. But what you describe is approaching a brink where we feel it all at once. And it's not as if the dollar is being utilized in a greater share of the world. Like with the sanctions regimes that we've put out there, we've literally gone out to various significant parts of the global economy and said, don't use our dollar. We are pulling our dollar back from you in the energy sector. And then meanwhile, we've said, and we're going to print a whole lot more of those dollars. And we're going to have this intense deficit spending.
Well, but again, during the rhetoric of this debt ceiling fight, I kept hearing this phrase that, well, it's going to be historic. The Titanic sinking was historic.
Yeah.
But the outcome wasn't good. And I like in our
Actually,
economy,
don't most things that are historic have like a very serious tragic element to them?
Of course, right? But our economy is like the Titanic. It's a big ship. It turns slowly, and there's a collision ahead. And we had an opportunity to change course. And what did we do? We increased our speed towards collision.
What's worse, though, the actual legislation and the 4 to maybe 5, 6 trillion, whatever it's going to be, or watching our own side gaslight the American people and try and spin this up into this great thing, this historic deal? What's worse for you guys?
That's what pissed me off.
Yeah.
If we're gonna put together a legislative package, tell the American people the truth. Don't try to sell them a bunch of because. Can I say that on this podcast?
You just did.
But that's why there wasn't a way that
You want the closest in prayer now to forgive us of the sins of Andy Ogles.
Well, that's why there wasn't a red wave in 22, because Republicans make all these false promises and they don't deliver, right? And so we've made these promises that we can't deliver on. And so what happens in 24? We made this bet. So whatever happens in 24, if it's not the outcome that we need and that America needs.
Well, the sad part is that history shows us that if we do get the presidency and we do get the Senate.
Sarcasm.
No, I'm serious. History shows that I mean, I wasn't here, but you were here during times when Republicans had all of it and still spent more than they ever did before.
Yeah, we were consistently told when I sit in the chairs you sit in now that, well, we'll pass the spending cuts right after we do the tax cuts. Don't you worry. That's what's next. And it's always funny how we get to the tax cuts and not the spending cuts. That was the false promise of the Ryan era. Yeah. But I think Eli poses a really important, instructive question. Where we fall short. And at times, we all do. At times in any negotiation, you can fail to deliver on that which you promised. Do we own that, or do we go and cast a vision that is an illusion to the people? And that is a challenge, because when you look at the work requirements that I fought hard for, I look at the tens of thousands of people every month that are going to be added to the SNAP program, and I think, well, thank goodness we didn't put work requirements on Medicaid. It probably would have led to a mass Medicaid expansion. And when you look at the rescissions, how do you stand up and tell people something's a rescission when a huge portion of it ends up in the Biden-run Commerce Department as a slush fund?
And you might want to go back and explain to the viewers when you're talking about the SNAP, where there was the work requirements, but then they added the waivers so that they
the way I've thought about that before is, when we think about work requirements, it's welfare to work. That the instructive purpose of that is twofold: to get people working and to reduce the welfare rolls. That's where the savings are. Well, the Democrats said, fine, we'll agree that you can get more folks working, but only if we can add way more people to the welfare rolls.
So
that is a terrible deal.
That's right.
Only a foolish negotiator would ever say, you know what? Sounds like I've got my welfare to work plan.
That's right. Oh, my
It
goodness.
was counterproductive. And then the regulatory reform. I know we all care about the constituents we have that reach out to us with various and sundry ways. Just the federal government's on their back, and needless compliance costs that oftentimes are duplicative with state or local regulations. And we're told we're having this transformational reform on regulation. And oh, by the way, the whole thing could be waived by the stroke of the pen of Joe Biden's budget director? Like, what are we supposed to really sell? When we go and sell that to people, does anyone feel guilty about that?
Sure.
And if they don't, should they?
Well,
That's why I won't sell it.
I think all of us voted no for a reason, and it's evident. And when I was back in the district this weekend, I kept saying that, as Ronald Reagan made the comment that if somebody gives you 70 to 80% of something you're asking for, take the deal and come back and fight for the rest. When you take what we passed in Limit, Save, and Grow, first year cuts, to your point, it's always the cuts are going to happen next year. It never materializes. And so the first year cuts, that Limit, Save, and Grow that we passed a month ago were $900 billion. First year cuts, as the deal says, is according to Heritage, $12 billion. You do the math, that's 1%. 1% is not even Biden saying no deal with clean debt ceiling, Republicans saying $900 billion. It's not even 50%. 1% sure not what Ronald Reagan defined as success, and then move on down the road.
Yeah.
Apparently you didn't read the headlines, Josh. this is historic.
Read the press release.
Weren't you in that conference meeting? Come on, man.
See, you guys have to change this place. I'm certainly on the back nine of my time here, and where I want to push back at your.
I refuse to believe that.
I want to push back at your comments earlier about you can't. There's a ceiling on you. If I have stood for any proposition here in my 4 terms, it's that you don't have to let other people control your nodes of power as a representative for your district. No one here can take away the 5 minutes you have to hold the powerful to account. And I see far too many of our colleagues cast away that time, use it for some ludicrous parochial acknowledgement, and that is something no one can take away. And to use that preciously takes the ceiling off, I would suggest. And also the direct action members of Congress can take throughout the world, throughout your district, where members of Congress can make a positive impact on people's lives. Our military nominations, I think that's the best perk of being in Congress, is nominating folks for the military academies. You get to be a part of this tremendous journey someone's going to take in the expression of their patriotism. So, use those opportunities, but just know how many millions of Americans feel utterly unrepresented by the dogmas that we see from both parties. And in this new freshman class, there are those of you who, by virtue of what we did in January, have come through the fire. And that gives so many people hope, and I know you take the obligation of that quite seriously.
Can I define moral courage on my viewpoint, since nobody else took the bait a while ago? Yeah. I think it's what Billy Graham said. It says when a brave man takes a stand, that the spines of others are often stiffened. And I love that. And I think that to cast off the fear of somebody who can't affect your eternity. I think most people, moral courage being the difference of the type of courage that Eli's experienced, combat courage, right? Moral courage is something we do by the strength of our character. And I think that in D.C., most people get stumped when they have the crossroads of political calculation versus conscience.
Yeah.
And I think that's the impasse. Is what am I doing? Is it for what it's going to do for me, or is it what's going to provide the best return for my country? And I think moral courage will consistently take conscience over political calculation.
The opposite of that is fear. I think fear is an unbelievably powerful motivator, right?
But it's often checked by people rationalizing. When they reach that very crossroads, what I have observed.
Become a
here-
chairman, then I can do the real good things.
Yeah. Well, it takes this little compromise now, but it's really for the greater good. And people rationalize that, and then they morally preen their own corruption.
Well, I was going to say, we talked about scabs before and scars. You're someone that certainly has the stripes and the scabs and the scars. I mean, you're kind of like
you're not in
hitting
shackles
it new.
right
But talk about what this place has, like the meat grinder that this place put you through from the time that you were first elected to where we are today.
I think my defining moment here was probably when I said I was done taking all lobbyist money and all PAC money, and from anyone, even people I agree with. And I think that created such a liberty in my actions that even during my toughest times, I was able to draw on that as great strength. I also, since being in Congress, have become a married man, which, by the way, I totally recommend. Marriage allows you to kind of level up in life, I've learned, in my vast now coming up on 2 years experience. And
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I think it's definitely made me better at my
That
job.
was actually a huge level up.
Yeah. You guys know my great wife, Ginger. But she would always say that God never gives us anything that we cannot handle. And you might think you can't handle what God's laying before you, but if you really, really have faith, you know that what is before you is something that you can ultimately prevail upon. And the other thing here is that far too many people allow the process to be the punishment. And we see our colleagues get so worked up over a bill on suspension or an amendment they get to offer or not offer. And sometimes those small fights, can really consume you. And I always try to keep my level horizon. What is it that we can do to advance the cause of my constituents this hour, this day, this week? And I know you guys all view service through that same lens.
I need to ask a follow-up to something you just said. You were like, hey, I'm on the back end of my time here. What if you had a magic wand, what would you be doing when you leave Congress?
I don't know. I think that you can stay too long at the dance here. I think we've seen people lose their edge, and I always think it's probably better to leave a little too early than a little too late. So I haven't, picked an exact deadline, but I just, after 4 terms here, I'm probably more on the back 9 than on the front 9, and I think it's also about the moment we're in. I think that we've got a real chance in 2024 to have a Republican president with vision, with boldness. I think we've got a great chance in the House to have gained some muscle memory from the reforms that we've all fought for.
Yeah, resistance builds strength.
Yeah, and as we get there, I might have a role in the Congress that is very important to me. I'm a Florida man. I love my state. Whenever I take off and it's 72 and sunny in Florida and 55 and raining here, I feel like a little part of me dies. So it'll probably be enjoying the warm sands of the Sunshine State.
I don't believe that for a second. I don't think Matt Gaetz is going to be on a beach somewhere unless you're getting after it and fighting, dude. I don't think.
Well, I just don't understand why in your state there's so much sand without a beach. I go to Arizona, I'm like, why do they put up with all this sand and dirt in the absence of a beach?
I know.
So, okay, question. Obviously, you have one of the top podcasts in politics right now. And it's
on any given moment, America's 58th favorite political podcast.
Just that's like Tim Burchett saying he's the 435th most powerful member of Congress, right? But no, that's pretty good.
With Tim, I think some of the non-voting delegates may actually have more power at this point.
So, okay, my question is, what podcasts or what kind of What do you digest?
I am a daily War Room listener. It's actually where I became
Yeah.
a big Eli Crane fan. I mean, the War Room audience made you in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So I listen to that each and every day. I'm also, I think at times everyone needs a ball for your brain to just go chase. And I'm a Florida State Seminole through and through. And so I listen to a podcast called The Nolecast that goes over like the ins and outs of Florida State recruiting and football and athletics.
Wow.
And it's a lovely way to turn off Washington for a few minutes.
Yeah. What about you guys? This is a fun segue. And what is it that turns your attention to
In
where
the
you just
same
need
way,
to
I
just tune
listen
out?
to Seeing Red, the Cardinals podcast, and Locked On Cardinals. Those are two of the podcasts. I'm actually a little bit really nerdy. I listen to podcasts on quantum physics as well. I strangely like that stuff. I like.
I would
talking
love
about
to see the demos
Higgs
on that.
boson.
Mila, what about you? What do
I
you?
listen to a lot. Like I listen to War Room's my favorite political podcast, but sometimes I'll hit up like Charlie Kirk or Jack Posobiec or Dan Bongino, and then I also have a ministry of faith-based podcast. It's called FAI.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool podcast as well.
Andy?
War Room.
The non-political.
But I tend to listen to, like on that plane and whatnot, Audible. I like biographies.
Like who's the last biography you listened to?
I'm listening to John Adams right now. So
It's good.
I've actually read through most of it, but I'm going back and listening to the
What
book.
do you think
it
John
David
Adams
McCullough?
would say about politics right now in 2023?
Oh, wow. I think he'd be disgusted by it, quite frankly. I mean, he's an interesting character. I don't not to get all nerdy, but, he represented the Boston Massacre. He represented the British soldiers. And, but no one, he was a very prominent attorney, if not the most prominent attorney of his time. But he very much believed in integrity, and he felt, and when you think back in time, he set a precedent. He felt that they deserved a fair trial, and he felt that they were innocent until proven guilty. And if there was one captain and then 5 soldiers, the captain was found innocent, and 3 of the 5 soldiers were found innocent. So only 2 guilty verdicts. Wow. And he offered, and it hurt us for a short time, his law practice, but he did the right thing for the right reason because he felt that they deserved their fair shake in court. Now you look forward as an attorney, like that's the basis of our judicial system. You should be innocent until proven guilty. Now with the media and Trump and some of the things that you've gone through and that quite frankly I've gone through, you're guilty until you can prove your innocence. And the world's upside down.
I think only if you surrender. I mean,
That's right.
And
we
surrender
talked
that
about
frame
that.
in the media. You don't surrender that frame to them because they've done so much to hurt their own brand for truthfulness that I think formats like this where people are able to get to know you, hear exactly the stuff we believe. I think that's the antidote.
Josh, you didn't mention your podcast.
I like the cutting horse industry, so I'll watch a good cutter mark a 74, 75, 76 laying down in front of a cow, crawling to a cow, which is a part of my background.
So how
Cutting
many
horse
people
industry.
listen to those, do you think? At times, does it feel like they're speaking just to you?
In 2
Hundreds
weeks,
of
in 2
people.
weeks, I'll go pick up a broodmare down in Whitesboro, Texas. I got enfolded to a really gorgeous blue roan stallion, and so I come.
I don't even know what language you're speaking.
Okay, I do have a question.
I go from appropriations talk upstairs to you talking about horses.
Well, we're talking
downstairs.
about things that can kind of help you. Like I listen to Federalist Papers. I listen to history. I love that. I love David Barton's ministry, my Bible app. But aside from all the political stuff,
What will history say about the 118th Congress?
What will history say about the 118th? I'm thinking about what John Adams said. John Adams said, he wrote a letter to his wife one time where he said, I hope that we have, I fear that every Congress will have people of noise and not of sense, people with basically meanness and not largesse of heart. And then he goes on to say that, it's a letter to his wife where he challenges that we would be a people that would be of honor and respect towards other people, even if we don't disagree on them. He says in popular government, it's going to take that to endure. So, the challenge I'm so grateful to men who, see the challenges and speak truth to power. And then to also temper it with, it was Washington who wrote a book on manners. So, that challenges me because I'm one of those guys that would rather, coming from my ag background, you charge a calf up the chute to get it into that chute. And so for me, I have to temper my natural temperament to want to go, wait a minute, there's a way to to
Yeah,
step on people's
know
toes
that
without
the-
messing up their shine sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know that the angry rabid hyenas who call themselves Democrats and socialists in the United States Congress are going to adopt our perspective on manners. I mean, I worry that we lay under the weight of the terrible decisions that Republicans and Democrats have made in this town, and the only way to claw back our country is to use some sharp elbows here and there.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree. You
Oh,
got.
you use them. I know you agree.
Yeah. But I'm as my 40s. I think I'm getting to where I can figure out again to that comment. How can you step on somebody's toes without messing up their shine? Sometimes to get them to move things your direction.
Well, I think part of it is it's got to be a policy conversation, not a personal attack, and that gets politics has gotten so vile. I mean, people within our own party right now are doing it to us and to one another, and it's not productive. Like, we can disagree on policy, then go have a beer. But when I start calling you names, that changes the dynamic of our friendship, right?
People get really offended here quite easily. I would have thought that they're like, to get to Congress, you'd have to have like some sort of thick skin.
Oh, yeah.
But man, we've got a lot of
Oh yeah,
snowflakes.
like a bill will pass by hundreds of votes, and you might be the one or like 5 people that vote no, and the person
happens
is
to this group a
offended,
lot.
and you want to say,
Yes.
do you really want to be a sore winner? Like you clearly won. Why you're upset that.
But to Andy's point, when we vote against something, it is not an affront to the individual. It is our studied perspective
You
of the
bet.
policy they
Yeah.
put forward.
I always say, I love you, I don't love your bill.
There you go.
Hey, wait a minute, why'd you have to single me out? I'm just kidding.
Okay, and with that, we've got to wrap it up. We can keep going all night, but really, thank you,
This
Matt,
was
for
on the
joining
record?
us.
When is this starting? I thought this was the before part.
Thank you for joining us. Please share this podcast with your friends. Also, share Matt Gaetz' podcast and like and subscribe Firebrand podcast, which is, in my opinion, to me, it's above War Room. I enjoy it.
Wow, that's quite an endorsement.
And I do
man.
like War Room. So like and subscribe. Please share all of our podcasts. We'll see you the next time on the Fresh Freedom Podcast.
And if you end up gone under strange circumstances, we'll see if Steve Bannon has an alibi. That was fun.